They didn't build the church to set you free. They built it so you would thank God for your own oppression. That line doesn't just apply to church. The same architects who built that system didn't build your newsfeed to inform you. And they didn't build your ballot to represent you. They didn't build your culture wars to give you an identity. They built all four to do one thing, to keep you looking sideways at your neighbor instead of looking up at them. Today we're going to talk about the system, not a system, the system, the one operating logic running underneath media, politics, religion, culture, wearing 4 different costumes, so you never notice that it's the same show. By the end of this, I want you to be able to spot the pattern in real time, in your feed, in your family group chat, in your own gut reaction, the next time someone tells you who to be angry at. So before we go institution by institution, I want to name the mechanism very clearly so that you can watch it repeat for the rest of this episode. Here's the blueprint. Division isn't a side effect of these systems. It's not just a bug in the system. It's not an unfortunate byproduct of passionate people disagreeing. It is the design. It is the product. It is the system. Maya Angelou talked about this very thing. She pointed out that centuries ago, Machiavelli wrote a manual on how the powerful stay powerful. And the whole strategy came down to this: separate and rule, divide and conquer. 500 years old. This is still the operating model. Think about what division actually does for a system that runs on your compliance. If you're fighting with your neighbor about whose fault the potholes are in the road, you're not actually asking who's been skimming the infrastructure budget. If you're convinced that the people on the other side of the aisle are your real enemy, you're not looking at the donor list. If you believe that people in the pew next to you are more saved or less saved than you are, you're not asking why salvation got turned into a hierarchy in the first place. Division isn't just chaos. Division is control. And here's the part that actually took me the longest to accept. Even with my own background in these institutions, the people running the divide, they don't need you to believe anything in particular. They don't care what denomination you are or what political party you follow. They don't need you convinced of a specific ideology. They just need you distracted from the people standing next to you. Because the moment that you stop fighting sideways and start looking up together, that's the moment that the whole structure gets nervous. So keep that in your pocket, because the question is not what do they want me to believe, but who do they need me too busy fighting to actually notice. Now let's watch it play out. Same mechanism, just different rooms. So let's start with the room that you're actually in the most without even realizing it. Okay, so here's a question. Have you ever noticed that 2 networks that seem to hate each other manage to make you feel exactly the same way at the end of every broadcast? Scared, outraged, certain the other one is dangerous, and of course, a little weirdly entertained. That's not a coincidence. That is the whole business model. Outrage is the most reliable engagement metric that has ever existed. It's not, here's a complicated issue with reasonable people on both sides. It's outrage. A calm viewer can close the app and put it aside. An outraged viewer, they stay and they engage. They watch more segments and they wait for the next clip. They share it with friends. They argue with one another about who's right and who's wrong. So the incentive isn't to inform you. The incentive is to activate you just enough that you stay. So Eleanor Roosevelt said something decades before the algorithm existed that describes exactly what the algorithm now does automatically. Pit race against race, religion against religion, prejudice against prejudice, divide and conquer. We must not let that happen here. She was talking about a political tactic. She could have literally been describing a content strategy meeting. Here's what makes this so effective. It doesn't feel like manipulation from the inside. It feels like information. It feels like that you're staying informed, staying engaged, staying aware. But ask yourself, after an hour of consuming that content, do you feel more equipped to solve a problem? Or do you just feel more certain about who the villain is? Those are two very different outcomes, and only one of them serves you. I'm not telling you to unplug and go live in the woods, although that would be very nice. I'm telling you to notice the emotional aftertaste. Information should leave you clear. Division media leaves you angrier and no more capable of doing anything about it. Okay, here is the same mechanism, a different room. The two-party structure, and I want to be clear, this isn't a both sides are exactly the same cop-out. It's something more specific. The structure itself, regardless of who's currently occupying it, runs on the same fuel as the media does. Your certainty that one team is the actual threat. So Charles Barkley put this about as plainly as anyone has. He said politicians, Republicans or Democrats, it doesn't matter which, are designed to make us not like each other so they can keep their grasp on the money and power. He wasn't being cynical. He was describing the mechanism. Think about how rarely in an election cycle that you hear a serious conversation about the concentration of wealth, the revolving door between industry and regulation, the donor class that funds both sides of the aisle simultaneously. Instead, you hear about the other side's latest outrage. Every cycle, just like clockwork. That's not an accident of a broken system. That is a functioning system, a functioning exactly as it was designed. Just not for the purpose that you were told. And this doesn't mean that nothing matters, that policy doesn't matter, that your vote doesn't matter. It means the emotional framing around all of it has been engineered to keep the fight horizontal. You versus your neighbor instead of vertical. You and your neighbor versus the people actually consolidating power while you argue. Horizontal fights are safe for the system. Vertical fights are not. That is the whole game. Now we're in my home turf. If you have listened to my content, you know that I spend a lot of time in scripture and church history, pulling apart the ways institutional religion turned belonging into hierarchy. This episode, I want to zoom out and show you it's the exact same architecture we just covered in media and politics. Denominational splits, doctrinal purity test, who's really saved, who's just performing it, who's going to hell for the wrong interpretation of the verse that's been translated 4 times through 3 different languages. This isn't accidental theological disagreement bubbling up organically over centuries. Division has been historically one of the most reliable tools for maintaining institutional control. Because a congregation arguing about doctrine is a congregation that isn't asking where the money goes or where the leadership is unaccountable or who benefits from keeping them anxious about their own worthiness. Shame and fear don't just happen to show up in these spaces. They're structurally useful. A person who is certain of their own worth is much harder to control than a person who is one wrong belief away from a disaster. And the divide and conquer piece specifically, pitting denomination against denomination, believer against non-believer, the properly faithful against the compromised, it does exactly what it did in the last 2 segments. It kept the fight lateral. It keeps you and the person in the next pew or the next church or the next faith entirely treating each other as a threat instead of ever turning around and asking the institution itself to be accountable. And I'll say this line one more time because it belongs here more than anywhere. They didn't build the church to set you free. They built it so that you would thank God for your own oppression and stay too busy defending the wall to actually ask who built it. Last room. This is the one that runs underneath the other 3 and touches almost everything. Race, gender, class, and generation. Every wedge issue that you have ever seen go viral runs on the same fuel that we've already named twice. Certainty that the group over there is the reason that your life is harder than it should be. And to be clear, real inequities exist, real harm exists. I'm not telling you those conversations aren't legitimate and we need to have them. What I'm pointing at is how those legitimate conversations get weaponized into identity versus identity combat, specifically because it's more profitable and more controllable than identity versus institution accountability. It's much safer for concentrated power if men and women are fighting each other than if working people across genders are asking who set the wages. It is much safer if generations are mocking each other online than if every generation is asking why housing, healthcare, and education are all becoming unaffordable in the same 50-year window. The tale is always the same. Across every version of this, does the conversation point you toward other ordinary people to resent, or does it point you toward the structure that benefits from the resentment? One of those is a distraction, and the other one is just where the actual leverage is. So here's the through line all laid out. Media, politics, religion, culture, 4 different rooms, 1 operating system. And that system does not need you to believe any particular thing. It doesn't care. It needs you divided. It needs you distracted. It needs you looking at the person next to you instead of looking at the structure above both of you. Which means the exit isn't more certainty. It isn't picking a side harder. The exit is noticing the pattern in real time and refusing to play your assigned role in it. So here's what I would love for everyone to actually do this week, and not just sit with it, actually do it. So number 1, pick 1 piece of media that made you angry this week, and before you share it or react to it, ask, who benefits from me feeling this specific emotion right now? Just that pause changes your relationship to the content. Number 2, have 1 actual conversation, not a comment thread, an actual conversation with someone that you've written off because of a label. Not to convert them, but hear them out. See who they are. See the person in front of you. And just to remember that they're a person, not just a symbol. Let's stop dehumanizing people. This single act is quietly one of the most subversive things that you can do to a system that runs on tribal certainty. And number 3, get local. Concentrated power scares nationally and internationally. Know your neighbors. Show up to the small, unglamorous meetings. The system can survive your outrage. It has a much harder time surviving your community. And I want to leave you with this. Bertolt Brecht wrote that all the gang of those who rule us hope our quarrels never stop. Because it's the quarreling that keeps them on top, not the quarrel itself mattering. So the most radical thing that you can do this week isn't picking a side. It's putting down the fight that they handed you, the fight that you didn't ask for, and picking up the one that actually threatens them, turning around and looking at the person next to you like they're your neighbor instead of your enemy. I'll see you next time.